What if I told you we got our hands on a secret ledger? One that shows exactly how a major city like Kampala drinks during the busiest time of the year. You see, this isn't some boring, high-level market report. Nope. This is a real salesman's private notes from the ground, covering the first week of December. And let me tell you, the story it tells is absolutely not what you'd expect.
So you probably think you have a pretty good idea of how the alcohol business works, right? You know the busiest bars make the most money, the most popular brands are everywhere. But what if the real story, the one that's actually hidden inside the numbers, flips all of that on its head? We're going to dig into some surprising truths from this ledger that'll make you question everything you thought you knew about this market.
All right, first up, let's talk about a classic business dilemma. Is it better to sell a whole lot of stuff or to sell stuff that's worth a lot? You know, the age-old battle between volume and value. In Kampala, the answer to this question shows a fascinating split in how this market really truly operates.
Now, if you just count the number of bottles heading out the door, we're talking sheer volume here. The market looks incredibly even. I mean, look at this. The top three channels are practically tied, each grabbing about 21% of all sales. So on the surface, it kind of looks like everyone's on a level playing field, right?
Well, hold on. Watch what happens when we stop counting bottles and we start counting the actual cash coming in. The second we switch over to value, the whole picture changes. All of a sudden, bars and restaurants just surge ahead, claiming over a quarter of the entire market's value. It's the perfect example of how just moving a ton of boxes doesn't mean you're making the most bank. In this market, when it comes to profit, they are the undisputed kings.
Okay, so we've established that bars and restaurants are the kings of value. But that's not the whole story. There's another super crucial piece of the puzzle. How steady is that income? The ledger reveals this wild contrast. It's really a tale of two totally different ways of doing business.
Get a load of this number. 177%. That is the volatility score for distributors and wholesalers. That is a crazy figure, and it basically screams that their sales pattern is anything but stable.
So what on earth does a number like that actually mean? Well, it means you've got two completely different worlds. On one side, you have the wholesalers, and they are on an absolute roller coaster. They live and die by these huge, infrequent bulk orders. It's a total boom and bust cycle. But then, on the other side, you've got restaurants and cafes. They're like a steady pulse, a heartbeat. They rely on consistent, daily customer purchases, which gives them this amazingly low volatility of just over 6%. Predictable.
Okay, let's jump into our next huge insight. This one uncovers a really powerful consumer trend that is creating a massive, and I mean massive, unfilled demand in the market. We're talking about a huge missed opportunity here.
I mean, this quote from the salesman's notes just says it all. The city is thirsty. People want the good stuff, top-shelf, globally known whiskey brands, but the supply just isn't there. And we are not talking about some small gap here. This is a gaping hole in the market.
And look, this isn't just a hunch the salesman had. The data gives us a literal most wanted list of brands that customers were asking for over and over again, but they just couldn't get. We're talking about huge names like Jack Daniel's, the Macallan, specific Johnny Walker labels. This isn't just a wish list, you guys. This is a documented paper trail of missed sales.
And here is the really crucial part. This supply gap proves the incredible power of going premium. Just look at the data from Tier 2 supermarkets. They only sell about 4.3% of the market's total whiskey by volume, right? But that tiny, tiny share generates a whopping 8.7% of the entire market's value. The profit is absolutely in the premium stuff, if you can even get it on the shelf.
Okay, it's time for our third big reveal. I want you to take a second and think about wine. If you had to guess, where is most of it sold? You're probably thinking restaurants, maybe liquor stores, right? Well, the data tells a very, very different story.
So what do you think? What is the single biggest #1 channel for moving wine in this entire market? Go on, take a guess. Because I'm betting the answer is not what you think it is. And the answer is merchant wholesalers. And honestly, it is not even close. You see that first bar on the left? That's them. They move almost 14% of all wine by volume. When you lump them in with other distributors, the wholesale sector is the undeniable absolute engine of the wine market, leaving places like bars and restaurants way, way behind.
Now, what's really fascinating is how they do it. I want you to burn this number into your brain.
8.87%. It might seem totally random right now, but trust me, it represents the single most dominant product in this entire study.
And here it is. Here's the punchline. Nearly 9% of every single bottle of alcohol sold, I'm talking across all categories, all channels, everything, was this one specific product, Robertson Natural Sweet Red. And it's all being pushed through that merchant wholesaler channel. It is an unbelievable example of the hidden power one single brand can have.
All right, for our final deep dive, let's look at the very bottom of the market in terms of volume. Now, you might be tempted to think these small players don't really matter, but the data shows they play these highly specialized and, frankly, surprisingly important roles.
It's what we're calling the paradox at the bottom. On one side, you have these mobile stockists. They move a tiny fraction of the volume, but guess what? They specialize in super premium, high-priced items. They're basically the market's luxury concierge. And on the other side, you have the restaurants and cafes. They're the smallest channel by volume, but as we already saw, they are the absolute kings of stability, offering this super reliable, low-risk stream of sales. It just goes to show, small doesn't mean weak, it means specialized.
So after all that, what's the big picture? What's the takeaway? Well, when you put all of these pieces together, one really clear theme just jumps out. Kampala's alcohol market is a market of extremes, a market divided. So let's wrap it up. The key takeaways from this salesman's ledger are pretty clear. First, this market is totally split between the value drivers, like bars, and the volume movers, the wholesalers. Second, that volatility we saw, it's not just random noise. It's a huge clue that tells you exactly how a channel operates. Third, the real money, the serious profit, is in premium brands. And finally, maybe the biggest takeaway of all, there's a huge documented gap between what people want to buy and what they can actually find. That's opportunity knocking.
And all this leaves us with one last fascinating question to think about. We've seen a market that's changing, with this growing hunger for premium products. The data shows us who's in a good spot and who's at risk. So, as this trend keeps going, the real question is, which of these channels is going to be smart enough and fast enough to adapt and capture this huge opportunity, and which ones are going to get left in the dust?